Good evening, and welcome to this special event. I'm Prabhat Hajela, Provost at RPI, and it is my pleasure to introduce the host for this event, the 18th President of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the Honorable Dr. Shirley Ann Jackson.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Curtis R. Preem Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center, or IMPACT for short. Now, as soon as I can bring up my remarks, we'll get started. Let me talk about this unique building for a moment, because it serves both as one of the most advanced performing arts centers in the world, and as an interdisciplinary laboratory for human perception, cognition, data visualization, and immersive technologies of all kinds. And it is a wonderful example of our vision for Rensselaer as the new Polytechnic, in which we serve as a great crossroads for collaboration across generations, disciplines, sectors, and even geographies. And there are two reasons we feel that such collaborations are essential. The first are the complex global and interconnected challenges humanity faces, including a changing climate and our food, water, and energy supplies, our concomitant need for sustainable infrastructure, and the intelligent allocation of valuable natural resources. Of course, there's the human health and the mitigation of disease, including new and poorly understood diseases such as Zika. And of course, the rise of new state and non-state actors and their effect on national and global security. Now, as a corollary to the networked challenge of what happens globally, we all are subject to intersecting vulnerabilities with cascading consequences when there is a triggering event. In a coupling, for example, of nature and technology, the great Sendai earthquake of 2011 in Japan offers an example of such a triggering event. As you know, the earthquake caused a tsunami with its destruction of electrical, transportation, and housing infrastructure, as well as unfortunate loss of life, coupled with meltdowns at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the resulting environmental contamination, the long-term risks of cancer from radiation exposures, as well as worldwide economic effects. Now, the very interconnectedness of our systems and societies leaves us vulnerable to such natural triggers and sometimes directed triggers with resultant domino effects. The second factor guiding us as the new Polytechnic are the opportunities that are realized and represented by the remarkable new technologies and tools that we have, particularly in the digital realm, and in the realm of molecular biology and genomics, whose usefulness spans many fields. And here today, to help us better understand some of our challenges and opportunities, is Central Intelligence Agency Director John O. Brennan. Now, I know everyone is very eager to hear from him directly, but please allow me to just tell you a bit about him first. Our guest today grew up in North Bergen, New Jersey. Now, while he did not journey terribly far to get to college, attending Fordham University in New York City, once there, he engaged very vigorously with the world, spending a summer in Indonesia and studying for a year at the American University in Cairo. Mr. Brennan graduated from Fordham University in 1977 with a bachelor's degree in political science. He later attended the University of Texas at Austin, where he earned a master's degree in government with a concentration in Middle Eastern studies. That same year, Mr. Brennan began his service in government at the Central Intelligence Agency. He spent most of his early career in the Directorate of Analysis, specializing in the Near East and South Asia, before directing counterterrorism analysis in the early 1990s. In 1994 and 1995, he was the CIA intelligence briefer to President Bill Clinton. After an assignment as Chief of Station in the Middle East, he served as Chief of Staff to CIA Director George Tenet, before being promoted to Deputy Executive Director of the CIA. In that role, Mr. Brennan led a multi-agency effort to establish what would become the National Counterterrorism Center and became interim director of the center. After retiring from the CIA in 2005, Mr. Brennan worked in the private sector for 3 years before returning to public service as assistant to the United States President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. During that time, he advised President Barack Obama on threats that include terrorism, cyber attacks, natural disasters, and pandemics. In March of 2013, he was sworn in as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. During a long and distinguished career, Director Brennan has been honored with many awards and commendations, including the National Security Medal, the Distinguished Intelligence Medal, the Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal, the Director of Central Intelligence Director's Medal, and the Defense Intelligence Agency's Director's Award. Director Brennan represents a kind of servant to our country and to its people that often goes very unrecognized, and he directs a staff of people who are unheralded heroes. And as you might expect, Mr. Brennan is very serious and focused on today's strategic and threat environments and concomitant intelligence needs. He also is very forward-looking, especially as it relates to technology and the geopolitical environment. And, as I think you'll find, he is empathetic. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Mr. John O. Brennan. I'm going to sit down.
It is great to be here this evening with you. And thank you, Shirley, for those two kind words. And thank you for inviting me here today. But most importantly, I'd like to say on behalf of many, many of your admirers, and there are numerous ones, thank you for your contributions to this country's future, this country's success, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as well as many, many things over the last 17 years, not just here at Rensselaer, but participating in so many boards, so many initiatives, lending your tremendous intellectual weight to issues of the day, and most recently as the co-chair of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. You truly are an icon within our society, and I just want to be able to say thank you for all that you have done. Thank you so much. We're quite proud, Rensselaer, for having Shirley Jackson here as your president. Now, over the past year, several agency officers have come to Rensselaer for meetings and discussions, and they have all come back raving about the quality of the students, as well as the tremendous work being done by the faculty and staff. They say it is hard to imagine an academic institution where the training and research efforts are more closely aligned with what CIA is trying to do on the technology front. So it is truly a privilege for me to come here and see firsthand what makes RPI so special and to help deepen the ties between our two wonderful institutions. Now, I look forward to talking with Shirley and to taking your questions. But before I do, I was asked to touch upon some of the major global challenges facing our nation today. maybe not the headlines themselves, but the trends behind them. And then I'll say a few words about how CIA is addressing these challenges, focusing in particular on the importance of fostering collaboration across disciplines, a subject that is deeply important to both Shirley and to me as we prepare our institutions for the future. Even when the world is peaceful and prosperous, there are plenty of global concerns to discuss. But we are clearly at one of those points in history when risk and uncertainty are running high, substantially higher than at any time since I joined CIA way back in 1980, simply because there are more forces afoot in the world that are new and profoundly disruptive. And because they are new, history offers few clues on how we might expect them to play out. The first of these forces is technology, specifically the cyber revolution. It is transforming basic human interactions across the globe, presenting opportunities for tremendous progress. But it is also creating vulnerabilities for America and our allies that can be exploited by everyone from hostile states to individual criminals. The risks are so pervasive that no organization can consider itself immune, and yet Western governments have not yet fully adapted their laws and regulations to the emergence of the digital frontier. Most worrisome, both here in America and in allied countries, is the lack of a political or national consensus on the appropriate role of the government in safeguarding the security, the reliability, and the resiliency of the cyber realm. Like the rest of the nation, the intelligence community is adjusting to the growing predominance of the digital domain. Last year, CIA launched our first new directorate in more than 50 years, the Directorate of Digital Innovation. This new directorate's mission is to enhance our understanding of the national security risks, threats, challenges, and opportunities that exist in the digital domain, and with deeper knowledge, take appropriate actions and make organizational adjustments accordingly. But regardless of how committed our government is to addressing the cyber threat, the fact remains that some 85% of the World Wide Web's critical infrastructure is held by the private sector. The cyber realm is a privately owned and operated environment in which the rules remain uncertain at best. So the only viable long-term strategy lies in building a unified national response based on close collaboration between the government and private industry. And I firmly believe that we can do this in a way that safeguards privacy and civil liberties and protects our security and ensures our future prosperity. The second disruptive force is not technological, but one of nature: global climate change. The rising likelihood of extreme weather in coming decades has the potential to create food shortages and humanitarian crises of unprecedented proportions, including a possible surge of refugees from inundated coastal areas and from already fragile regions such as Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. And I should add that the scope of global displacement, largely due to armed conflict, is already staggering. There are more than 65 million refugees and internally displaced persons worldwide, the highest number since World War II. UN requests for humanitarian aid this year alone topped $20 billion, more than triple the amount requested only a decade ago. The intelligence community believes the overall risk of food insecurity will increase during the next 10 years because of climate change and extreme weather, along with the ever-present culprits of conflict and disease. In turn, declining food security will contribute to social disruption and political instability. When it comes to climate change, CIA has no well-placed sources that can offer intelligence on when and where we can expect the most dire effects. Scientific forecasts are out there in the public domain for all to see. But our analysts do integrate climate change into their assessments and of global stability, and of how various governments are likely to react to the effects of a warmer planet. We are already seeing Arctic powers jockey for position as receding sea ice opens up opportunities such as new shipping routes and rich natural resources. And in the years ahead, we are likely to see further tensions as the effects of climate change continue to spread. The third disruptive force is societal, and it is hard to label. Simply put, it is a general, persistent dissatisfaction with the status quo, an anti-incumbency trend brought on by unmet expectations. And it is present throughout the world, manifesting itself in widely divergent ways. In the less developed world, it finds expression in violence and extremism, rooted in reaction to government corruption, mismanagement, and failure to provide the most essential of services. People tend to identify less with nation-states and central governments and more with tribal affiliations, ethnic groups, religious movements, and, for some, extremist and terrorist organizations that oftentimes better meet their sense of identity as well as their daily needs. In the developed world, this dissatisfaction is associated with a spike in nationalism, arising from varying degrees of disillusionment with the post-war democratic capitalist order. With the rise in nationalism has come a rise in great power rivalry, as countries such as China and Russia assert themselves more forcefully beyond their borders. And while CIA is focused on adapting to the many new challenges confronting us on the global stage, I must say that when it comes to dealing with Russia, we've been getting a lot closer to our Cold War roots lately. Meeting these challenges and the many other threats to our nation's security is a daunting responsibility, but it is not one that the CIA or the US government handles alone. The private sector, and especially academic institutions like RPI, have a role to play as well. For decades, RPI has been helping our country develop solutions to important global challenges. You have devised breakthrough technologies that have strengthened our economy, enhanced our national security, and improved our quality of life. You have produced trailblazers like Ted Hoff, who helped develop the first microprocessor, spurring a digital revolution that has touched virtually every aspect of our personal and our professional lives. And today, RPI is pioneering techniques in critical fields like big data, which hold such enormous promise for improving how we fight disease, run our businesses, protect our country, and so much more. Most importantly, RPI is leading the way in educating a new generation of innovators, providing them with the skills, expertise, and perspective to tackle the challenges of our rapidly changing world. Under your new Polytechnic paradigm, for instance, you are training your students to focus not only on their individual fields of study, but on solving problems across disciplines. As well as anyone, RPI recognizes that collaboration is essential to the modern workplace and to addressing the many complex challenges confronting our nation today, including on the national security front. And that's a philosophy that tracks closely with our own approach to developing talent at CIA. Early last year, we launched a comprehensive effort to modernize our agency for the future. And one of our main objectives was to encourage our officers to reach beyond their own disciplines and to collaborate across institutional lines. Over the years, CIA had developed a tremendously capable workforce, but our officers were segmented into stovepipes, or what some would call cylinders of excellence. As a result, we were often tackling problems with one hand tied behind our backs and devising solutions without the full benefit of our agency's expertise. So under our modernization program, we eliminated the stovepipes and created 10 mission centers, each bringing together specialists from all of our key disciplines: operational, analytical, support, technical, and digital. Our goal is to bring to bear all of our agency's strengths against every challenge we face, whether in a regional or functional mission center that are empowered by our directorates. We want our people to think of themselves first and foremost as intelligence officers united in a common cause, not as specialists steeped in a specific discipline. And we want to promote the idea of one team, one fight. That's why whenever I administer the oath of office to new officers, which I do every month in the lobby of our headquarters in Langley, Virginia, I stress the importance of teamwork. I tell them that the challenges we confront today cut across so many disciplines that no single officer or component can tackle them alone. Instead, they must be addressed by teams representing a range of skills and expertise. Of course, this is not unique to intelligence work. The author, Walter Isaacson, makes the same point about teamwork when talking about the keys to innovation in virtually any field in the digital age. As he put it so eloquently, innovation comes from teams more often than from the light bulb moments of lone geniuses. The ability to work with others is crucial, especially in technical fields like yours, where innovation is the key to success. I am sure many of you know the story of William Shockley, the Nobel Prize winner, who is considered one of the most brilliant scientists of the past century. In the 1950s, after earning acclaim for his seminal work on the transistor, Shockley formed a technology company near Stanford University. He persuaded some of the brightest young minds in science and engineering to join him. But Shockley was so abrasive and so volatile that his colleagues found him impossible to work with. Before long, a number of them severed ties with Shockley and formed a new company called Fairchild Semiconductor. While Shockley's career fell into decline, the leaders of Fairchild went on to co-invent the microchip, helped send a man to the moon, and found companies like Intel that would usher in the digital age. As the technology writer Michael Malone put it, Fairchild was like a seed pod, and it just scattered new companies all over. And that's what really began what we think of as the modern Silicon Valley. The lesson of this story is clear. No matter how talented you are, you will never reach your true potential unless you learn to work as a member of a team. It is a lesson we stress over and over at CIA. Throughout my career, I have seen a number of highly capable officers come to the agency and struggle because they could not collaborate effectively with others. Despite their talent, they never lived up to the expectations the agency had for them and that they had set for themselves. That's why CIA looks for more than raw talent when we recruit. We look for people who enjoy working in groups and who are driven by more than personal ambition. This does not mean that we want all of our officers to approach their work in the same way. All organizations have different cultures inside their walls: the scholars and the accountants, the engineers and the public affairs teams, or in CIA's case, in one instance, operators and analysts. Those specialties are important, and we want people to take pride in their individual disciplines. But we do not want them to isolate themselves from the rest of their colleagues or retreat behind the walls that rise up around professional communities in any organization. Instead, we want our officers to realize that we all have something to learn from one another. We want them to understand that all of us are smarter than any one of us, and to embrace the idea that if we work together, our achievements, both individually and collectively, will be far greater than if we go it alone. This is the future we are preparing for at CIA, one that is defined by teamwork and integration. And quite frankly, I hope that you will be part of that future one day, because the agency is a great place to apply the expertise you learned here at RPI and put it in the service of our nation. We have received more than 300 applications from RPI in the past 3 years in fields such as aerospace engineering, biomedical engineering, computer science, applied mathematics, and nuclear engineering. Even if you join us as an intern or co-op, you will be given real projects for real missions. For instance, one of our computer science students recently identified the digital footprint of a foreign cyber adversary. And we have an engineering intern who custom designed a piece of equipment in response to a quick turnaround request from our foreign field. I started in operations and spent most of my career in analysis. But if I had to do it all over again, as I tell my employees, I would definitely want to come back to CIA as an engineer. These are very exciting times to be on the technical side of intelligence, whether in our Directorate of Science and Technology or our Directorate of Digital Innovation. I may be a bit biased, but CIA is the best place to get straight work on missions that are not only fascinating, but that directly benefit our country and safeguard our fellow citizens. As a liberal arts major at Fordham University, I feel particularly privileged to be invited to RPI, a university I'm sure that I would not have been accepted to had I applied many years ago. But I have been enamored and fascinated by the tremendous revolution that has taken place in our country over the last 36 years since I joined CIA, which has fundamentally changed our way of life. I am fascinated by what scientists and technologists and engineers are able to do in trying to help make sense out of the world. Listening to Shirley and talk about the coupling of the environment and various forces. To me, life is about interaction. Interaction that takes place sometimes spontaneously, and other interactions that are deliberate. And therefore, I have this quest to understand how things fit together and why they work and the variables that are at play, whether we're talking about geostrategic threats around the globe or how to make some type of technological innovation advance the human condition. Again, it is a tremendous privilege and honor for me to be here and to be with you this evening. Thank you.
So, Director Brennan, let me start this way, and seems to be kind of maybe almost too simple a question. But can you try to explain to our audience a little more the critical role of intelligence and intelligence agencies as part of our national strategies, our national security, et cetera?
What I tell all of our officers, is that me?
It's probably me.
What I tell all of our officers is that intelligence is not an end in itself. Intelligence is something that is to be obtained, understood, learned, uncovered, discovered, so that we can take some type of action so that we prevent a terrorist attack, prevent a proliferator from obtaining some type of device, to be able to inform our policymakers and the president about what the options are in terms of how to look at a conflict or a issue and challenge that really needs to be addressed. Oops.
Well, while he's changing, I'll give you a bit of Rensselaer history. He talked about the formation of Fairchild Semiconductor. The group of people who formed it were called the Fairchild 8. And one of the Fairchild 8 was Sheldon Roberts, who's a Rensselaer alum, and was a trustee years ago. And I had the privilege of getting to know Sheldon Roberts when I first came to Rensselaer. And over at the Tech Park, there is a facility that gets used a lot. It's called Pat's Barn. And Pat Roberts was Sheldon Roberts' wife, and she actually loved old Dutch barns, and she paid to restore that barn. We have a technology park about 4 miles from here that's home to about 65 different enterprises, primarily technology-based. So I thought I would throw in that bit of history. So,
Okay.
please.
Okay, we'll see if this works. So intelligence is something that empowers follow-on action or decisions. And so what we need to do at CIA is make sure that we have as much opportunity to understand the world's many challenges as well as opportunities, so that we can use our authorities, which are formidable, in order to carry out our missions. And just very briefly, CIA's missions, I group into 5 categories. 1 is clandestine collection, whether it be human or technical. 2 is all source analysis. 3 is covert action. And I must point out that anytime CIA undertakes covert action, it is done at the direction of the president. There's a written finding that undergirds all of our covert actions, and it's reviewed thoroughly by the Department of Justice and all the lawyers. So it's not something that CIA just decides to wake up one day and say, hey, let's do this rogue covert action. Although some people might like to do that, we don't do that. Also, counterintelligence, we and the FBI have special authorities to make sure that we're able to prevent a lot of the adversarial intelligence services from undermining our national security. And then also developing foreign relationships and partnerships, which also gets to this issue of teamwork. And one of the things that has changed significantly over the years, even though we had special relationships with the Brits and the Australians since our very beginnings back in 1947, we have expanded that international architecture of partnerships, because as good as CIA is, as good as the U.S. intelligence community is, we need the support, we need the capabilities, we need the accesses of these other intelligence agencies.
Director Brennan, you talked about the formation of this new Directorate of Digital Innovation, and we're delighted to have Sean Roche here.
Sean Roche, the Associate Deputy Director for the Agency for Digital Innovation.
And he spent the day here on the campus. But a lot of what that Digital Innovation Directorate focuses on does have to do with social media and things that happen on the web. And I'm going to certainly want to talk with you about technological opportunities and threats. But if I may, I want to start with one that's a thorn in the side. ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. And, you know, we can only discuss what you can discuss, obviously. But in June, you testified before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that despite the progress against ISIL on the battlefield, that it remains a formidable force in terrorism capability and global threats have not been reduced because it doesn't take a lot of resources to carry out a terrorist act. But also, ISIL is a threat because of its use of social media platforms. So how do you protect against an adversary that isn't a nation state and at the same time has access to and makes quite ample use of social media?
First, when I made the point about that the successes that we have had on the battlefield in Syria and Iraq had not yet been reflected in a degradation of ISIL's ability to carry out terrorist attacks abroad. First of all, because they can do that in many different parts of the world, and the battlefield setbacks did not have a direct correlation to their ability to carry out those attacks. I believe we are going to have over time, and we've already taken apart some of those networks, but I think there's still a ways to go. But the proliferation of social media and the increasing sophistication of a lot of the members of ISIL, and they track all the latest technological developments as well as the media and the journals, so that they know which types of apps to use that are going to be difficult for intelligence, law enforcement agencies to track. So they use that digital domain as their environment to recruit, to communicate, to train, to direct, to guide, to surveil. They take ample opportunity of that social media. And I pointed out in my remarks that our country and other countries have not yet come to terms with the appropriate role of the government in that digital domain. We know what the role of government is to protect our streets and to protect our coasts and our borders, even our airways. But there is not a national consensus right now about what the government's role should be in that digital domain. Because a lot of people see that if the government is operating in there, it's an invasion of privacy. I think what we have to realize is that environment is the environment of the 21st century and beyond. Most human interaction and activity takes place in that digital domain. Financial, educational, commerce, trade, you name it, is happening there. And those who would do us harm, whether they be terrorists or proliferators or pedophiles, whatever, are now looking at that domain and seeing all the opportunities to apply their trade. What we can't do is to have it become a safe harbor because our laws and our society has not yet adapted to the realities of the 21st century, where this sort of amorphous digital domain where everybody wants to take advantage of it, but yet they are very shocked if the government is playing a role there. And unfortunately, I think there has been a dialogue of the poles on this issue, and I don't think it's been an honest dialogue. We need to find a way to balance privacy, civil liberties, security, prosperity, because as we go to the Internet of Things, we're all going to be dependent on the integrity, reliability, security of that. So terrorist groups like ISIL, and this is a different generation also than Al-Qaeda when they struck us in 9/11. And so they're coming from Europe. All those foreign fighters that have flooded into Iraq and Syria, they have come from European countries where they have the cutting edge technology and knowledge. So they're taking full advantage of that, and this is something that is going to challenge us for years to come.
You know, I mentioned in my introduction of you that I've found you to be a very empathetic person. And I had noted that in your early days, you actually spent time living in Indonesia and a longer time living in Egypt. And, you know, you happen to be an expert on South Asia and the Near East, but you've spoken publicly about your great respect for Islam as it is practiced every day. What can you say to our audience and to help them and help the American public understand the difference between terrorism and Islam?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time studying, working, traveling throughout large parts of the Islamic world, and I really have come to admire culture, society, and people there. And I must tell you that when I continue to interact with a lot of individuals, my counterparts and others from these countries, they are outraged at what a group of criminal psychopaths have done in terms of taking their religion hostage and distorting it and perverting it and using it as this ideological drive to carry out their criminal and reprehensible activities. Murder, rape, thievery, you name it, across the board. And they do it under the banner of Islam. And that is not consistent with my understanding of Islam. I'm not a Muslim. But when I talk to presidents and prime ministers throughout the Middle East, President al-Sisi is a good example inside of Egypt, that he just gets visibly angry at what individuals are doing. Now, this is a tough issue because it's a religious issue. And unlike a lot of the terrorist groups, or groups in the past, political movements that use terrorism, they had political objectives. So Northern Ireland, the IRA, Basque separatists, Palestinian nationalists and terrorists, they were driven by specific political objectives as opposed to what we see now, these absolutist goals of an Al-Qaeda or an ISIL, where they're trying to basically take under their wing territory, people, the world, and it's their way or the highway. And to me, that is just so inconsistent with what the tenets of Islam that I have come to know, and that I think 99.9% of Muslims worldwide have come to know. So religion is a very, very dangerous platform that is, when it's distorted, because individuals who have been attracted to this clarion call of ISIL or Al-Qaeda, they've grown up in far-off highlands of Pakistan or Afghanistan or other areas, and they think that this is a legitimate religious path and movement, and it is not. The individuals who have pushed these individuals forward and to carry out these outrageous suicide attacks, they've hijacked their religion. And so, to me, there's a real distinction between Islam and the tenets of one's religion and how individuals can corrupt that religion, any religion, Christianity, Judaism. They've all been subjected to extremists and individuals who have believed in just the absolutism of that religious belief. And as we talk about diversity around the globe, there's no room for that type of attitude and movement.
In your remarks, you alluded to Russia. And as you know, last month, Secretary of State John Kerry called for a war crimes investigation of Russia and the Assad government because of their bombing campaign. And this particularly came after a ceasefire that lasted barely a week in September. Could you elaborate a little more on how concerned we should be about a some would say a newly aggressive, but maybe it's not so new, Russia, and what can we do about that? And seemingly openly disrespectful.
Terrorists make me angry. Russia frustrates me to no end, I must tell you. They really do. And I've been to Moscow a number of times. I have interacted with my Russian counterparts. Russia must play an important role on the world stage. Important country, big country, formidable military force, a nuclear power. Unfortunately, Mr. Putin and his inner circle, I think, have continued to try to perpetuate his rule, his authoritarian rule inside of Moscow, but also advancing Russia's interests to the detriment of peace and stability in other countries. Syria is a good example. I think Russia is promoting its interest there to the last drop of Syrian blood. And so the very intense bombings, whether it be air, artillery, and others, that I think have shown disregard for what we consider to be minimum requirements for war, the law of armed conflict, so that you minimize the casualties among civilian populations. Despite what it is that the Russians claim, time and time again, as we try to forge agreements with them, they have not followed through on their commitments. Now, they point fingers at us and they say that we don't follow through, but when I look at the balance sheet, there has been a consistent lack of follow through and adherence to agreements, whether it be in Syria or Ukraine or in other areas. And so they're very aggressive right now, particularly on the intelligence front. And they have, again, very, very formidable capabilities. And I think what Mr. Putin is doing right now is taking advantage of what he perceives to be an opening on the world stage because of what is perceived to be U.S. reluctance to flex muscles. And the difference between the United States and Russia is that Mr. Putin can do whatever he wants, and he doesn't have a democratic system of governance that's going to hold him to account. We are a society and a country and a government of laws, and we will not just blindly pursue our national interests to the detriment of others.
You've done something that hasn't been done in 50 years at the CIA in forming this Directorate of Digital Innovation. And we know a little bit about digital innovation here. I want to thank you for mentioning Ted Hoff, who invented the microprocessor, but there's been a kind of a stream. The first really viable cathode ray tube, of course, the microprocessor, the digital camera, the internet protocol behind networked email even. And of course, in more recent times, involvement of Rensselaer alums in the development of the cognitive computing system, the IBM's Watson. And so can you talk, though, when you make a change like the one you are driving, what does it take to change the culture of an agency like the CIA?
It takes a lot, and I feel very fortunate that I spent 25 years at CIA, then went off to the private sector to learn what it's like to be in the private sector and earn a living that is not appropriated by Congress.
Well, it's just appropriated by the IRS. No, it's okay.
And then went to the White House and worked for 4 years, and then came back to CIA, and I felt I had a special obligation, based on my experience, to not just take care of the daily inbox, but to really try to make a difference as far as posturing the agency for dealing with the challenges of the next 69 years, and not just the last 69. Because the world has changed so much. And when I came back to the agency, I took a bit of time to reacquaint myself with what was going on inside. And the agency's capabilities are really tremendous. They're absolutely outstanding. And they've changed so much since the time I came on board. In 1980, I had an electric typewriter. That was the only technical instrument I had on my desk. When I wanted to do research and to see whether or not I would find relationships between different bits and pieces of data, I would lay out the hard copies of cables on my desk and color code them and then associate them that way. Now we have these amazing data analytics and databases and tremendous power. And I knew that the agency had the technical capabilities and the digital domain was found throughout, but we didn't have a place that was going to serve as a mothership. And so right now we have what I refer to as a matrix model. We have the 5 motherships of operations, analysis, support, science, technology, and digital innovation, empowering those 10 mission centers that are based on regional and functional areas. And I wanted to make sure that that digital innovation was going to empower everything we did, all of our missions. And people said, well, you don't have to change the organizational structure in order to do that. And knowing the agency and knowing a place that you have 69 years of history and you have some cultures that were embedded in those cylinders of excellence, those stovepipes, I knew that you had to mix things up in order to change the culture. And I want to preserve the pride and the esprit de corps that exists in different parts of the organization, but I want them to be able to work together so that they're going to be exposed to capabilities that exist outside of their discipline. And if you are separated out, you don't have an awareness of what even the requirements are or what the capabilities are that can meet your requirements. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that we're able to bring people together so that there can be that interaction. Again, to me, life is a series of interactions, and configuring the agency in a way that's going to enhance that interaction, I found that by organizational change, it was really going to attack the bad culture that had grown up, the stovepiped culture. And now we are trying to bring along a different type of culture, a culture of teamwork, a culture of understanding the great capabilities that exist in far-off corners of the agency. So you can have a specialty in operations or analysis, but there's tremendous capabilities in the digital domain,
or in science and technology that can really infuse your work with tremendous new capability. But if you're not aware of it, you don't even know how it can empower what it is you're doing. So I think if you really want to get to cultural impediments and obstacles, you have to perturbate it a bit. You can't just expect people who have grown up in an environment for the last 20 or 30 years to have this metanoia experience that is going to now have them look at things differently. They have to be exposed to things. They have to understand exactly, how what exists outside of their environment really is going to empower and affect what it is that they do.
It's interesting because we in the university form centers that cross disciplines in order to try to move in new directions. So, we were talking about the influences of an ISIL through social media. So we actually have a center here called the Social Cognitive Networks Academic Research Center. The acronym is SCHNARC. It's a little strange, but
SCHNARC?
Yeah. Well, that's how we pronounce it anyway. But this center actually tries to understand, how ideas and movements develop, how they spread, and how they influence and even can create societies. You think something like that would be interesting to you?
Oh, absolutely. Even if it's called SCHNARC, I think it's going to be very useful. I've worked a lot in the Middle East, and so the Arab Spring was a phenomenon unlike any other that was seen in the Middle East. And despite CIA's and NSA's and NGA's and all the other three-letter intelligence agencies' capabilities, and we had sources and accesses in different places, having somebody within the Prime Minister's office or having somebody who can tell you what the military is planning did not give you a sense of just how dry the tinder was throughout the Middle East when that Tunisian fruit salesman self-immolated, and which was the spark that set the rest of the region ablaze. Now, if we had a perspective then about what was trending on social media, or what people were thinking and talking about, having more of a pulse on daily activity and frustrations and concerns and criticisms, I think we would have had a better ability not to predict with great precision at all, because we don't do predictions, but we can identify some of the variables that are at play that, as a result of that combustion, is going to then lead to a number of developments. And giving our policymakers that type of advance warning allows them to think through, okay, well, if this happens, how are we going to react? What are we going to do? What's the contingency planning? And I think more and more, we need to have the insights that are gleaned not from having a spy or asset in a particular location, although they are invaluable. Right. We need to have that as well as things that are going to give us an idea about what those other interactions and variables are that are out there that are going to have such influence on the course of events. So, that's why I think harnessing the power that exists right now on the technological and scientific front and exploring how we're going to combine that with some of our traditional capabilities, it's going to create new capability, new power, new insights.
Well, this center actually brings together computer scientists, even physicists, cognitive scientists, linguists, et cetera, psychologists, because all of these things come into play. But the world is kind of awash in data, but the real issue becomes making sense of it, and most people who don't understand these things can think that all data matters. And what people are finding is that there has to be a more kind of intelligence applied, even when one has these analytics, algorithms, and so forth. And so, we're proud that Rensselaer grads were key in developing, I mentioned, the IBM Watson computer. And I think we have with us this afternoon a gentleman who has been called the godfather of Watson. I don't know where he may be. There he is. He's John E. Kelly III. He is the Senior Vice President of the Solutions Portfolio and IBM Research. He's a trustee here, and he happens to have 2 degrees from Rensselaer. John, stand up and let us see. You know, he's becoming a rock star. Now, you know, our faculty and students, we have a very strong partnership with IBM, and we've created what's called a cognitive and immersive systems lab, and we're working in a long partnership with IBM to bring together cognitive computing, data analytics, immersive technologies to allow groups to learn in a multimodal fashion and to make better decisions. And so are those, you know, I would assume that with your digital innovation directorate, you're not just searching the web, but we actually feel that these immersive technologies and a cognitive intelligence behind it are going to be more important. Are there moves afoot to perhaps do some of these things at the agency?
Absolutely. We need to explore the outer boundaries of what technology has allowed us to even think about. And I've had the opportunity to go to a number of conferences over the last year, and really quite impressed with Watson. I've met the director of Watson, and artificial intelligence, which is coming, and it raises so many questions, including in terms of ethical frameworks and other things, that I just think that if we're going to be the central intelligence agency, intelligence today has so many different facets, as well as opportunities to be able to inform our government and help protect our national security. And so, as you said, we're just overwhelmed with data. There's so much data that is out there. And I remember when I was part of the effort that set up the National Counterterrorism Center, and the legislation that set it up gave us the authority that we should have access to terrorism-related data, terrorism-related information. And I remember sitting and talking with the members of Congress on this a number of times, as well as within the intelligence community. I said, how do I know something is terrorism-related unless they have the opportunity to pulse against something, a predicate that is terrorism? So if we're walled off from a lot of the other data that on its face is not terrorism-related, we're depriving ourselves of knowledge. Now, obviously, for the government, you can't have access to everything. But there are ways, and there needs to be ways in the technological front, to be able to have a system where data resides where it should be, and the government then has the ability, based on what is a legitimate predicate, to be able to pulse to see whether or not there's going to be correlation. And I know there's a lot of talk about data mining, and what I think that the government needs to do in order to stick to the principles that our nation is founded upon is that we need to make sure that there's going to be the ability to allow privacy and civil liberties to flourish, but at the same time give the government the opportunity to carry out its role and the rule of law. And that's why things like artificial intelligence, Watson, we really need to be thinking about how we're going to deal with the advances in technology like encryption, where mobile devices can hold warehousefuls of data that could be inculpatory, exculpatory of a crime, or can give law enforcement officials insight into a crime or a terrorist attack that's going to be taking place. But even if a judge issues a writ from the bench that a banker would need to open up a safety deposit box, or an owner of an apartment building would have to open up an apartment, that judge's writ will be defied by the technological inability to access the data that is there. And so how are we going to ensure that those who really want to ruin our well-being and way of life are not going to take advantage of technology in a manner that allows them to cause catastrophic damage to this country? And so that's why I think taking full advantage of all of the opportunities in academic institutions like RPI here, and others, to see what we can do to have the technology advance the human condition, but at the same time be mindful that sometimes these technologies have another edge to them.
Well, technology always sits on a knife edge, can be used for good or ill. Mm-hmm. But you know, having been chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the days of my youth, you You know, I have a particular interest in critical infrastructure. And, you know, we recently experienced this so-called DDoS, or distributed denial of service attack, where, you know, devices were turned into little bots and, you know, caused quite a bit of disruption, particularly with some of our students' favorite social media sites, but other things. And it affected a significant part of the US and even Europe. And I realized that the Department of Homeland Security, you know, has responsibilities vis-a-vis infrastructure here, domestic. But how do you think we secure our infrastructure and global supply chains when these sorts of things can occur today, and they can be subject to cyber attack and even be directed in a way? Now, I will say this much to you, that the nuclear power plants are not exactly controlled over the internet, but
This is the issue in question for the 21st century. How are we going to protect that critical infrastructure that we all rely on, that is connected to the internet, where there is tremendous opportunity for minds that understand how to create malware, how to take advantage of zero-day exploits, how to get in and navigate into a system, whether it be a DDoS attack that's going to bring down the facing page of a financial institution, which the Iranians did with great success a number of years ago, which really sent a very strong signal to our banking institutions that they need to up their cyber hygiene game. But as we move forward with the connection that's going to be in place with the Internet of Things, defense lags behind offense. As we create these offensive capabilities, or protecting our networks really is going to take an understanding of what type of offensive capabilities exist as individuals try to look for the vulnerabilities and a way to exploit it. So there's not going to be a simple solution to this at all. I know you know this much better than I do, that as we continue to grow, as we continue to have everything basically around the globe connected in some manner or another, there is going to be tremendous opportunity to get into systems that some will be more vulnerable than others. And whether or not we're talking about hospitals or, as you say, transportation systems, there are individuals out there, nation states, as well as groups that are contracted by nation states. As you point out, the botnets that can be pulled together and can very quickly disable or disrupt internet activity that can have real impact. One of the things I worry about, and our financial systems, just like our nuclear systems, are better protected than others in terms of our national financial systems. But what happens if one of our adversaries tries to get in and manipulate the data in the system? You only have to manipulate one element of that data to raise questions about the integrity of the rest of the data. Right. So there is deletion, there's destruction, but there's also then manipulation. And these are things that are going to have a direct impact, but also it has a psychological impact on our society. And as we have just recently seen with the Russians that have used their very capable cyber capabilities to collect against our networks that are related to the electoral system with the intent of disrupting the foundational principle of our democracy, which is our upcoming election. This is something that I think we're going to have to confront, and from my perspective, I don't think we're going to see an end to this, you know, once the election happens. The Russians, Chinese, and others are played by a different set of rules than we do.
well, as you know, the Snowden revelations about, you know, warrantless surveillance by the NSA and, you know, the WikiLeaks, the hacking of the DNC and so forth, you know, has raised a lot of questions about privacy, and you've alluded to those. But, you know, is privacy kind of passé now? I mean, is there any real privacy anymore? And is the real privacy that you don't have any? You know, when everybody's business is out there, then what difference does it make?
Well, whenever I write an email, I think about, this appearing on the front page of the Washington Post, that's for sure. So I have to be very, very careful about that. But privacy is more difficult today just because of that digital domain where we all have activity on, whether it be an email or other types of things. What I find quite surprising also is that, and I talked to some major publishers of newspapers in the country, if I steal something from you, it would be...
But you wouldn't.
I wouldn't. But if I did, and I gave it to someone else, knowing it was stolen property, I would be held liable for a criminal act as well.
That's right.
But if your email is stolen from your email account, from your internet service provider, the Washington Post, the New York Times can publish verbatim that stolen material from you. And when I've talked to the publishers about it, they say that, well, if it's in the public interest that that information be released, that's when they decide to publish it, which means that anybody of any celebrity is going to be vulnerable to having whatever they do subjected to possible theft on the internet, but then also having it broadcast, not just by bloggers, but also by publications. So we live in a different time, and I think we have to be mindful that because of the availability of so much information and the access that people have to it, it can find the light of day. So privacy is different. Should we think that it's passé? No. Privacy and civil liberties is something that we need to be able to protect and guard as best we can.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you spent time, as I mentioned, out of the country, and we're creating something called the Summer Arch. So when you talk about cultural change, and even, there's some disquiet among some of our students or faculty, but the idea is to have the students start the sophomore year early. The junior year early, the summer after the sophomore year, but to be able to then spend time away during the regular academic year. Can you talk a little bit about how that experience, that early experience of going abroad for you, helped to shape, your views of the world and even the kind of career that you pursued?
I grew up in a blue-collar, lower-middle-class community in northern New Jersey, and until I went overseas, my world was basically northern New Jersey, New York City. I was a commuter back and forth to Fordham. So when I went to Indonesia and I went to Egypt, and I saw just how big this globe is, how diverse it is, and interacted with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, I found it just so stimulating because I realized that I was just a very small person in a very small part of the globe. And I guess that's what sort of generated my wanderlust. Because I want to understand what is out there. Our lives are so short and very fleeting. And to me, having more opportunity to experience different perspectives, different lands, different phenomena, really is quite stimulating to the brain. As I said, I'm a wannabe architect and engineer because I want to understand how things fit together. What's the optimal configuration of systems? And I keep talking to my people all the time, systems engineering, whether you're a liberal arts or whatever else, you need to understand how best to configure and put into place the authorities, the capabilities, the tools, the processes, the procedures, all of that so that you optimize the outcome. To me, having the exposure outside of your sort of comfortable area really gives you an opportunity to, first of all, experience what others are like and are doing, but it also helps you put in perspective where you were. And if you stay within the environment that you're most comfortable and familiar with, you will not be able to understand how that nests within the broader ecosystem. Now, you may very well go back to that environment that you came from and stay there, but that outside exposure to me is enlightening. I found it just so rewarding. I grew up in a very strict Catholic family, and when I was in college, I took courses on other religions, and I went to other parts of the world, and I saw how their religious practices are, what their doctrine is, and it really helped me put Catholicism into a context that I had never really appreciated before. And so it has helped shaped my thinking, the way I look at others, how I look at myself, and again, trying to get as much context as possible for what it is that you're doing. And again, I just think it stimulates the synapses that allow you to think new and creative things about what you did as well as what you can do.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You know, you all know all this anyway, but my first trip abroad was a camping trip across Europe. I started in London, took the ferry across from Dover to Zeebrugge in Belgium. And then we started camping. We pitched tents every night. I was supposed to meet up with 2 friends from MIT, from college. And they didn't show up. They were supposed to meet me in London. And then I said, well, I'm here. I'll go to Dover. So then I went across the channel. We started camping. And of course, we went to Brussels. And then on a dark and stormy night in Amsterdam, in a tent with the water rising.
Do I want to hear this?
Yeah, you want to hear this. I hear, Shirley, Shirley. And so they're my 2 friends. They had gone to Tel Aviv and they missed their flight. And so they were a bit late. But I decided I would just camp and so stay on the trip. So anyway, we camped all the way to Moscow, stopping in different points across Europe. And of course, my father, he was very responsible for my ended up being in science, said, you'll never get a security clearance. So but here we are. So thank you, John. Thank you. Let's thank the director.